Hey ladies, we are going to have a little look at cutting out. Now for those of you who are experienced bag makers, you can completely walk away from this video, but I know we've got a lot of really new bag makers and I just wanted to start right at the beginning for them. So I have my 2 pieces of fabric. These will be for my lining. The same will apply for all of the exterior pieces, but I've already cut my exterior pieces, so I'm going to show you with the lining. Now you will notice that the pattern pieces all say cut on the fold. What I like to do, rather than cutting on the fold, and if you do want to cut on the fold, then that means that you fold your fabric in half, you place your pattern piece on that fold, and you will cut all the way around the outside. So once you've unfolded your fabric, you will get the entire pattern, the entire piece. However, I find that sometimes if you're not quite accurately on the fold, your pattern piece will end up being, your fabric piece will end up being just fractionally too big, or worse still, fractionally too small. So for me, the easiest way is to print the pattern piece twice, so that I've actually got a full pattern piece, and I just tape it together down the middle of the piece where it says fold. So you've got the piece that says fold both sides. So let's just take my first piece of fabric, and this is not interfaced. I don't interface it before I cut it. And I'm going to position my pattern piece on the grain. So the grain of the fabric is going top to bottom. Now, for me, I use a rotary cutter, so I will sometimes put perhaps pattern weights on, which is very much up to you. If you want to pin that down, then use the pins that have the flat tops, so you can put your rulers and what have you over the top. Either way, however you secure it, if you decide you're going to use a rotary cutter, you will need something that doesn't sit proud of your fabric at all, simply because you're going to be putting a ruler on top. So I'm just going to pop those through just to secure my fabric. If I'm honest, I don't usually even bother with these, but if you're a new bag maker, it's probably worth doing. And I'm going to take my rotary cutter and my quilting ruler, and I am going to literally lay my ruler so that it's right on top of the edge of that fabric, and then I'm just going to, looks like I need a new blade in there. When you're rotary cutting, always cut away from yourself. For those of us that watch the Great British Sewing Bee, I've watched people do things, they're going like this and they're going all over the place. It's terrifying. Turn your fabric round so that you are constantly moving away from yourself. So you're lining up the edge of your ruler with the edge of the pattern piece, and you're just going to literally go along the edge. Now, if you're not a rotary cutter fan and you cut with scissors, you can cut with scissors. However, what I will say is this business does not work. You need to keep your fabric as flat to the table as you can. Keep your scissors with the bottom blade on your cutting surface and go along the side of the fabric. Now, you will never ever get as accurate cut with a pair of scissors as you will with a rotary cutter. It's possible to do, I've done it, but let me just, if you look at that, there's nothing showing along the top edge. That's literally right on the edge. You can see there that there's fabric exposed, so that is not a perfect cut. So I'm just going to go along there again on that side and remove that little bit of extra where I've used scissors. Rotary cutters don't have to be scary. You can see there's a whole, it's a millimetre or two, but it will make a difference where I've literally used the scissors rather than the rotary cutter. I'm going to do the bottom, and I'll do exactly the same with all of my pattern pieces. Now the only bit that I do cut with scissors is these little bits out of the bottom, because I find that doing those with a rotary cutter, I tend to go too far. So I'm just going to trim out those bits at the bottom. Again, I've got my fabric flat on my table, so it's my scissors are literally butted onto the table, so I don't get too much extra. It really is worth cutting carefully. And there we go, that's one piece cut. And you're going to do exactly the same with every single piece of your pattern. Just going to remove the pins. And there we have one pattern piece, one piece of my lining already cut. Now, my fabric was pre-pressed, so make sure that you press before you start cutting, because if you don't, then you'll get variations in sizes because of the creases that are in your fabric. I'm just going to give that another quick press just to make sure that it's all nice and flat. And then we're going to look at how we interface that. So I have some fusible woven interfacing here. This is, it's actually not G700, but it's an equivalent version of it. I buy my interfacing by the bulk because I make a lot of bags. So I just buy 25 meters at a time because I go through so much of it. Woven interfacing is exactly that. It looks like a cloth. It has a cloth-like feel to it. So it's soft and it's got a drape to it, which means that your fabric will continue to have some drape to it. One side is rough and the other side is smooth, and what you want is the rough side facing upwards. Now, most patterns, mine included, will tell you to cut one lining or two lining fabrics and two woven interfacings. I do not cut my woven interfacing. All I do is take my cut exterior piece, lay it onto my woven interfacing, make sure it's nice and flat. I'll take my iron and I will just gently place it in the center of my pattern piece. Now, if you've got a smaller pattern piece, you can just use the corner of the sort of side of your iron. All you're doing, you're not pressing because your fabric's already pressed, is you're trying to melt the glue a little bit. And we're doing what I think when you see these building programs, and they call it dot and dab, and they're putting up plasterboard, you're just trying to stick that piece of fabric to the woven. Now I'm just going to rough cut just fractionally outside of my main pattern piece, my main piece of fabric. I'm going to remove my pressing mat. I will take my rotary cutter, and again I'm going to line up the ruler with the side of my fabric and trim off any excess interfacing. Now my interfacing isn't fully attached at this point, it's only kind of attached in the middle, but it's not going anywhere because it is attached in the middle. You see, I constantly move the fabric round so that I'm always cutting away from myself. Rotary cutters are sharp. This one has it's a retractable thing so that you never have the blade sticking out unless you're actually cutting. Some of them you have to press a button on the side. Let me just show you some different rotary cutters. I've got lots of rotary cutters. I do like a rotary cutter. So this one, you have to press the button for the blade to come out, and the blade is then permanently out until you press the button for it to come back in. I like this one for a small bladed one because it sits nicely in my hand. This one, the blade goes out, the blade goes out, the blade goes in. So you have to physically move the blade in and out. Likewise, this one. I can't give you advice on rotary cutters. It really is very much a personal preference. This is my favourite at the moment, and this is a Kai. I do use the smaller ones occasionally, but I generally work with the larger, I think it's 45mm blades in. And you can see once it's cut, the blade just goes back in, so we don't have to worry about leaving it on our table, catching our hand on it. When I've done retreats or classes, there's a £5 fine if anybody leaves a rotary cutter blade open, because they are dangerous. So I'm just going to trim out those corners with my scissors. Making sure that I'm only cutting the interfacing, not cutting the fabric itself. Just got a little fibre there that needs to be trimmed. So now my interfacing is exactly the same size as my lining fabric or exterior fabric, whichever panel you're doing. Back onto my pressing mat. And again, I can go and I can now press all the way to the outside. Now, the reason why we cut all the interfacing away first is simply because the interfacing is covered in little spots, which is what the rough side is, of glue. And that glue will melt and it will end up all over the face of your iron. And whilst there are lots of different methods to remove it, you'd rather it didn't end up on the iron in the first place. So you're not actually pressing it as such, you're heating it. So nice and slowly, just running your iron. You don't have to put any weight on it. I can literally just move it with my hands. I don't use steam. You can use whatever the manufacturer of your woven interfacing tells you to use. And usually the instructions come with it or are printed along the side of your interfacing. So just run the iron all the way across just for a couple of minutes. And in an ideal world, I would leave this. I usually leave it 20 minutes for it to cool down. However, this is live TV, if you like. So I'm just going to get rid of those couple of threads that appear to have come across. And my woven interfacing is now fully attached to the back of my lining panel. Now I am going to move on to something different now, which I'm going to show you, because in the pattern you have two options. You can either use foam or you can use fusible fleece. Now this is fusible fleece and I've already cut it to the size I need it according to the pattern using the dashed lines. This is H640, Violin H640, and again you can see it, well I don't know if you can actually see it, but one side is rough, it's got little tiny dots on it. I'm not sure that actually that shows very well. And that's the glue side. So that's the side that we need against our fabric. So if you're going to use fusible fleece, we're going to add the fusible fleece to the lining as opposed to the exterior, because once we've got those twists in, it's difficult to press that front panel. So if we add it to the lining, we can press it quite easily. So I'm going to lay my piece of fusible fleece with the rough gluey side down onto the wrong side of my lining panel, and you can see that it fits centrally. There's a gap all the way around the outside. Now once I've got it laid in position, I'm going to pick it up holding onto the fleece and the exterior fabric in one go and turn it over. And then again, taking my iron, and I'm going to start in the centre. Fusible fleece, some fusible fleeces have a tendency to wrinkle. And I'm very slowly just going to move my iron out towards the side of my panel from the centre. And all we're doing is, again, we're heating it enough to melt the glue. I don't use steam. I don't use steam for many reasons, but the primary reason is because I use a wool pressing mat, And when you add steam to a wall pressing mat, first of all, it goes straight through and makes my cutting table all wet, which I don't like. Second of all, it smells like a wet sheep. Now, anybody that's got a dog, and if you take your dog out in the rain, and when you come back into the house, the whiff from a wet dog is quite astonishing. Well, the same applies with the wall cutting mat. Wall cutting mats are fabulous because they take the heat from the iron, it's reflected back into the wool, and it kind of gets reflected back into the fabric, so it presses from both sides. Very, very popular with quilters who are slightly obsessed with beautiful seams and pressed open seams and such like. So again, I'm just literally going all the way across. I'm not putting any pressure on. You can see I can move it with my fingers. It's just the weight of the iron. And that will adhere my fusible fleece to my lining panels. Once you think you're done, you can turn your, if you just flick it at the sides, you can see if it's actually attached, and that's fully attached. And that's my fusible fleece attached to my lining panels, or a lining panel. I'm going to do exactly the same with the second panel. So if you're a real sort of scaredy cat when it comes to rotary cutters, you can use scissors, but you will find that you get a much better cut with a rotary cutter. Once you've conquered the fear, you will never go back to cutting with scissors. I cut everything with rotary cutters. I even cut curves. I'm not going to show you that today because we have no curves in this pouch, but we will cover curves at some point in the future with cutting with a rotary cutter. My aim is that every time I make a bag, if there's something I think you can learn, I will add a video. So choose a rotary cutter that sits nicely in your hand, that feels ergonomic to you. Everybody's got different size hands. I have big hands like a coal miner, so I need something with a sturdy handle. I've had a few that have had really quite lightweight handles, and they just I feel like my hand's going to slip down. This one I like in particular because it's got grips on the side, so when I'm holding, I can put my thumb onto that little grip and I feel like I've got good purchase on it. So this is a Kai rotary cutter. They're not overly cheap. I think about £20, which sounds like a lot, but actually I use this all the time, so it's well worth it. And if you buy a decent pair of scissors, I mean, these are Kai scissors. Again, you'll pay 20, 25, £30 for Kai scissors. These ones are Genome scissors, just as good, slightly heavier, but you need to find what fits well in your hand. Likewise, if you've got tiny hands, then actually you may find that the smaller blade, the 18mm blade, works better for you. For me, in bag making, I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference whether you're using a big blade, a 45mm blade, or a small blade. I think perhaps, I don't know, I use the big blade all the time because it's just what I pick up. It's my go-to rotary cutter. So that is your basic interfacing. So your woven interfacing goes on first, then your fusible fleece goes on top, and that's for the lining panels only. If you're using foam, then the foam will be so basted to the exterior panels, as you will see in the video as we go along. So the best thing to do, I think, with regard to this is actually to wait until you know exactly what you're going to use for your pouch, and then work through the videos accordingly. If you're an experienced bag maker, I'm really sorry, I'm not trying to teach you how to suck eggs, but there are an awful lot of ladies here that have never made a bag before, and I really wanted to start right at the beginning for them. So there we go, that's that part done.